there's the principle and then there's the practice. There's the way things are supposed to work, but very often that's not the way things work out on the ground. So under the rules that Congress established for the program, nonprofit organizations other than 501c3s were not supposed to get the funds. But the Small Business Administration, in rolling out this program, did not have any internal mechanisms in place or controls to screen the tax exempt status of loan applicants.
So as the world's getting, I don't want to say back to normal because it's definitely not normal yet, but over COVID, it's time to take a look back and go, where did all that COVID money go? You remember all that paycheck protection money, which used to mean something else in the way back before days. Did it actually go to bail out government unions? So Max Nelson's with the Freedom Foundation, a great organization up in Washington State. Max, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
For those who don't know, the Freedom Foundation, originally named the Evergreen Freedom Foundation, founded by the late, great Bob Williams. I know we lost him recently, but I've never met a guy who is more on top of government spending and government union largesse than your founder.
He was an inspirational figure. And, I didn't have the privilege of working with him too closely in a personal capacity, but I did meet him a number of times, saw him at movement events. He was an incredible advocate for the values of fiscal responsibility and just by all accounts, a phenomenal person. So we feel his loss very keenly here and hope that there's many folks willing to step up and continue the fight and the mantle that he started with the organization. So we've got a good team here, but we do miss him quite a bit.
In every community, there's always a guy like Bob Williams. Here in Colorado, 20 years ago, there was a guy named Larry Latito, very quiet, short guy who did something that teachers' unions especially despised and government bureaucrats despised. He had a skill. And that skill was to be able to read budgets. Oh my God. And he would ask questions about what was in the budget. And it was terrifying to see the responses because when you look inside budgets and you start asking reasonable questions, you start getting unreasonable answers. And I was amazed how this small man, now since gone, both Larry Latito here in Colorado and a hero up in Washington State, Bob Williams, not big guys in stature, but really big guys when it comes to fighting large government. And it makes me realize it doesn't take armies. It just takes some passionate individuals. And if only we have more of them, we could really win. Speaking about largesse, you guys have a particular interest in government unions. Why is that?
Well, we've found as an organization that strives to promote the values of individual liberty and free enterprise, limited accountable government, over the course of our 30-year history, fighting for those values, one of the most consistent and well-entrenched advocacy groups that is on the opposite side of those values are government unions, public sector labor unions. Their interests just naturally align with bigger, more expensive, and less accountable government. That's just the way it is. There's nothing wrong with employees having a voice at work, but government unions have a lot of structural problems that put them at odds with taxpayers and good government advocates.
Like what kind of structural problems?
Oh, well, for example, if you go back historically, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was known as a big pro-labor president, right? But he is also famous for opposing unions in government. And his reasoning was government services are so important. We force people to pay taxes to fund government. That no special interest group should have the ability to hold those government services hostage through a strike or through withholding their labor, shutting down the government. So strikes was his big concern. And if you think about it, the same reasoning is true today. Teacher strikes are probably...
Let me stop you right there for a second, because I do find it fascinating. I go back and I've read the quotes, and even in the speeches of FDR, including, I think, one of his inaugural speeches, he talks about the dangers of government unions. Now, this was a guy who was a union man, beloved by unions. Back in a time, if there was ever a need for representation in factories and mines and the private sector, it probably was then. But even this bastion of big government, this ideal candidate for the modern nanny state, he saw the dangers of unions in government because these key governmental services no one else can provide. It's not like you can go to the other post office or the other police station or the other water utility. There are certain things. It's not like there's another army to go and fight for us if this one decides to go on strike. And for a lot of families, particularly working families, if your kid is in a government school, you have no choice. And when that government decides to give you less services or go on strike, your kid loses.
That's exactly right. And probably the best manifestation of that in recent memory are teachers unions and teacher strikes. We saw that throughout, these happen periodically, even prior to COVID. But COVID and the school shutdowns that resulted across the country were essentially an opportunity for the unions to act like they were out on strike. They were already out of the classroom. Now they got to dictate the terms on when they would come back. And we're seeing some of those debates even play out now with recent strikes out in Minneapolis and Sacramento.
Say a little bit more about that. They got to decide when to come back. It was amazing because we're fighting, I remember the fights here, to get schools back open for the kids. The parents wanted it, the kids needed it. But in so many districts, it was the teachers who didn't want to go back to work, or at least not in person.
Correct. And of course, there's a lot of variation around the country. Some small school districts with smaller unions or no unions were able to find ways to reopen in-person instruction almost immediately and continue teaching through the pandemic safely and effectively. But certainly those bigger city school districts where unions tend to have stronger control or more, certainly more militant, they decided to use this as an opportunity to hold government services, hold public education hostage for their own political demands. And sometimes that took the form of, caps on additional charter schools, which provide a source of competition that public schools, traditional public schools, don't want to have to deal with. In some cases, they went so far as claiming that, we need to defund police. We need to get school resource officers off campus before we're going to come back. And or raise taxes or any host of policy demands, political demands that really didn't have anything to do with COVID or workplace safety. But because the teachers and the unions were already out of the classroom, then they just viewed this as an opportunity to make as many demands as they possibly could, leverage the emergency and the fact that government was not working and the people that were relying on government were being left out in the cold, and use that as an opportunity to advance their own agenda and interests. And in some places, they did it very effectively.
All right, so COVID is over. Most of the schools are open again. Most of them are finally unmasked, which I feel so sorry for this generation of kids who lost one full year of education, and then the next year maybe they got some at half scale with masks and social distancing and all the rest. A lot of companies lost money during COVID shutdown. And during those lockdowns, the government decided to print up more dollars and just give it to companies. I could understand some of the logic here in that we are forcing you to go out of business, so we're going to try to at least keep your employees going. Did unions also get that bailout money? And I'm trying to figure out why.
It's a great question, John. So research that we published here at the Freedom Foundation back in February identified a period of a year where unions were getting federal government COVID stimulus funds that they were not eligible for. And this all happened through the auspices of the Paycheck Protection Program. And if you go back to the early days of the pandemic, March of 2020, the first package of COVID relief that Congress passed included, it was a multi-trillion-dollar package, but it included as one of the major programs, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. And the reasoning behind it was exactly what you just mentioned, was to make direct payments to private businesses, employers, to enable them to keep people on payroll, avoid mass layoffs as everybody was trying to survive and navigate through these government mandated lockdowns that just took everyone by surprise. The funds were supposed to go to small businesses, defined as businesses with fewer than 500 employees. But generally speaking, the funds were not available to nonprofit groups. If you were a 501c3, a charitable nonprofit, which is the kind that probably most people are familiar with, you could receive funds funds through that program. But any other type of tax-exempt organization was not eligible to receive these PPP funds.
And our unions, if I recall, unions are 501c6s, something like that.
Very close, 501c5s.
My math was never that great. Leave me alone. All right, so then how in the world could a union receive bailout money if you can't go to not-for-profit organizations like unions?
Right. So as anyone who's interacted with government at any level for any period of time understands, there's the principle and then there's the practice. There's the way things are supposed to work, but very often that's not the way things work out on the ground. So under the rules that Congress established for the program, nonprofit organizations other than 501c3s were not supposed to get the funds. But the Small Business Administration, in rolling out this program, did not have any internal mechanisms in place or controls to screen the tax-exempt status of loan applicants. And so it wasn't just unions, actually, that were getting funds that they weren't eligible for. It was 501c4 advocacy organizations. It was 501c2 building corporations. It was 501c9 training and apprenticeship programs. So our research zeroed in on unions. Because that's that's from a mission standpoint, that's what we care about. And there's a database of over 11 million loans, so you have to provide some kind of parameters for the research. But what we identified was that 223 loans went to labor unions and related organizations, totaling $36 million during this period of a year that they were not legally eligible for the funds. And so far, the SBA does not appear to have taken any action to counteract.
Wait a second. Let me see if I got this right. We're talking how many millions?
36.1 million to be exact.
So $36 million has been given, I'll be kind, in error to organizations that aren't supposed to have this money. And correct. So I'm assuming that just like any other, I won't use the term fraud, but mistake, that money needs to get paid back. Would I be right?
You're absolutely right. And I don't think fraud is too strong a word in this case, because the Small Business Administration developed the paperwork, the loan application paperwork, and these unions filled it out. And even if the SBA wasn't checking the tax-exempt status of applicants, the organizations applying for the funds still had a legal obligation to fulfill those loan applications accurately. And some of the questions on the loans, for instance, the first thing a loan applicant would do is check a box indicating what type of legal organization they were. Now, 501c5 was not a box that was there to check. So the question becomes, what box were these unions checking? I don't know. We don't know that for sure, because the actual applications, believe it or not, are not in the possession of the federal government.
Any organizations
and can't be reviewed.
Any organizations in my state of Colorado, any labor unions, get any of that money?
There was one that we identified. The Westminster Education Association received a loan for $8,300. That's a teachers union, as I understand, out in the state of Colorado. And when you talk about
$8,000,
correct, not
a
massive,
huge amount, not a massive,
correct.
But something that they are required to pay back if somebody sends them a letter from the government saying you need to pay this back.
That is absolutely correct. Absolutely.
So I'm curious, you guys found this bit of waste. By the way, the same type of fraud was rampant in unemployment insurance. We saw people who were never employed, people who have never been fired, getting checks. Somebody filed under my name to get their money. I mean, it was just rampant. Sure. So I understand these mistakes happen. Are you guys following up to make sure that the money gets paid back?
Well, we're doing everything.
How do you even do that?
Well, we're doing everything we can. So we have sent our research to the Small Business Administration's Inspector General, who has done some good work. I'm
sure that once he sees that strongly worded letter, he will drop everything he is doing in order to right this moral wrong.
One can hope, John. One can hope. But I will say that the Inspector General as an independent position in an oversight role, at least at the SBA, has done already some good work in uncovering other ways in which the SBA dropped the ball on handling the PPP funds. He hasn't picked up on this one yet, at least publicly that I'm aware of, until we submitted our research. But we also submitted it to the Department of Justice. Has a National Center on Disaster Fraud, which allegedly is tasked with looking into exactly this type of scenario. So we've alerted those federal agencies. We've also alerted members of Congress. Just this last week, there was a group of 4 Republican members of the committees of jurisdiction in the House of Representatives that sent an oversight letter to the Small Business Administration asking them to look closer at this information. So hopefully, I mean, if the government does the right thing, which I know is asking a lot in many cases, then the taxpayers should get this money back. There really is no justification for inaction.
Even if they got all the money back, even if all the money from these misgotten gains go back, thanks to inflation, what they will repay is a lot less than what they borrowed. So
correct.
Unless there's some sort of significant fine, penalty, and interest on there, even getting an interest-free loan for a couple years is a terrific thing. Hey, people want to learn more about the research on this. Where do they go?
The report is available on the Freedom Foundation's website. You can check it out for yourself at freedomfoundation.com. That's freedomfoundation.com. It's pretty easy to find with a fair amount of news coverage. Even if you just Google Union's Paycheck Protection Program, you'll probably get some hits.
Hey, Max, thanks so much for great information.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.